It's Dave and Evelyn from the camera store, and today we're taking a look at the
much anticipated Nikon Z8.
This is the Nikon Z8, and this is a full frame, fully featured, fully loaded mirrorless digital camera. It packs a lot of the same features as the Nikon Z9, and it's $1,600 Canadian less than its big brother. And so this baby doesn't hold anything back.
It's basically the best of both worlds. You get the high performance of the Z9, which we really, really love, but in a much smaller package without that battery grip to it.
Yeah, and so there are a few small sacrifices, but otherwise we're seeing a ton of amazing features, a lot of the things that we loved about the Z9, and so let's get into it.
When Nikon launched the Z9, everybody was so excited about it because Nikon brought a bunch of really cool tech to the market. Now, the number one thing we heard when people were buying the Z9 was, I wish it was a little bit less expensive and I wish it didn't have a grip because I want a slightly smaller body.
Kind of more in that like D850 realm of things, you know, and this really truly is the successor to the Nikon D850. And one of the biggest things though with the Z9 when it came out was that it didn't have a mechanical shutter. And so we have a backside illuminated stacked sensor, and this is 45 megapixels. It's the same one that's in the Z9, which is proven to be the type of sensor that can handle having just electronic shutter so that you don't have things like rolling shutter, banding. We saw it really perform well in that regard.
Now, not having a mechanical shutter is a big deal and opens up a lot of really creative options in a camera like this, including speed. This camera is all about the speed. So using RAW plus large JPEG, we can shoot up to 20 frames per second. And if you want to shoot JPEG only, you can go up to 30 frames per second without any crop.
Yeah, and don't forget that if you're okay with a DX crop, you can shoot 60 frames per second. And if you want just a little 11 megapixel JPEG, you can even shoot 120 frames per second, which is kind of bonkers. But it's very cool that you have all these options. And so if you're shooting a lot of action and stuff like that, like this is the power tool camera, but just smaller than the Z9.
The Z8 has the same X-Speed 7 processor that's found in the Z9, and that gives us a ton of processing power, and this camera needs it because it's got a lot of cool stuff going on.
And the other nice thing is if you're shooting in brighter sunlight, I mean, even on a day like today, if you don't have an ND filter, you're able to shoot up to 32,000th of a second.
You really have to wrap your head around that because up till now we've been limited to 1/8,000th of a second mechanical shutter. So having that much more to play with really opens up a lot of creative options. So Evelyn, all those frames per second are very cool, but it doesn't really matter if the autofocus can't keep up with it. Now the autofocus system is very robust in this camera. It's the same that we've seen in the Z9, but we have a new addition. We now have an airplane profile mode. So what this is doing is actually looking for the airplane, but actively looking for the cockpit. Just like when it's looking for animals, it's actively looking for the eyes or the head. Or if you're shooting motorsports, it's looking for the helmet or the visors of people.
Yeah, and I hung out, you know, around the airport as you do, and got a few shots of airplanes. It works well. It's not something that I normally would take pictures of in my day-to-day, but it's cool that it has it.
What do you like taking pictures of?
I do like taking pictures of cute things like puppies. And so we found a lovely little puppy. My friend Kyle's dog, Kubo, he's just a little baby, but we had fun with him today. We got to snuggle, we got to play with some toys, give him some treats, and Kubo's just adorable.
Yeah, and you can really see in these samples we've shot here that, I mean, it tracks a very dark dog very accurately and finds the eyes. It's amazing to kind of watch.
Yeah, and I really thought Kubo would be a good subject to test this on because of that thing, is that can it find its eye when he has dark eyes and dark fur? And it did a phenomenal job. And so we have some really adorable pics of Kubo.
Now you were shooting a ton of shots of Kubo, which was very cool, which brings up sort of the buffer side of things. I mean, you can have very fast frames per second, but if you only have a brief moment to capture it, it's no good if the camera's gonna buffer out. Now, I'm happy to report this camera is a beast that way. And if you're using the high efficiency RAW files with the CF Express Type B card, you can shoot up to 1,000 shots in a row without it coming down on you.
But at the same time, we have to mention that because this doesn't have two of the CF Express Type B card slots like the Nikon Z9, one of them is actually an SD UHS 2 memory card slot. So you got to be mindful of that if you are doing a backup and you're using a slower SD card in the camera, then it's just going to slow down that process for you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the camera only writes to the slowest card in the camera. So I do like that they have two memory cards. I'm surprised they actually didn't do two CF Express Type B cards.
Something's got to be different, Dave. There's not much, but there's a few things. And that's going to bring us into the handling and the experience of shooting with the Z8.
Now, when it comes to the actual grip and feel of this camera, it feels fantastic. If you've been shooting with the Z9 already, you're gonna feel right at home with this camera. And if you're brand new to it, you're gonna appreciate the controls and the layout and all the button placement.
Yeah, I'm finding that the depth of the grip still feels really nice. Just like the Nikon Z9, it still has like a good handle to it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very quality camera. You can feel it through and through. All the buttons, all the controls feel very positive, very tactile. I like that they've labeled the buttons very clearly, the ones you're going to be using all the time.
Yeah, from an interface standpoint, we have the same menu system as the Nikon Z9 as well. And I find Nikon systems very intuitive to use. It's easy to go through their menus. And so even though it's been a while since I've actually shot with a Nikon mirrorless camera, I found that I could find pretty much everything that I needed quickly. Another thing that we liked about the Nikon Z9, which had some improvements with firmware, was the electronic viewfinder.
Now you really have to get a good look at this viewfinder to appreciate it. It's very big and very bright. It's 3,000 nits.
Yes. And it's 3.69 million dots, but yeah, it's a nice, big, beautiful viewfinder. So when you look through it, you feel like you're looking through the lens of the camera. So if you're still a DSLR shooter and you haven't tried one of the more current mirrorless cameras, you gotta give it a go because they've come such a long way.
The viewfinder is fantastic. It's one of the things I appreciate about this camera a lot, especially when you're using it. That's something you're looking through all the time.
Yeah, and we also have a nice, bright, high-resolution panel on the back of the camera. So if you're shooting video or you like to frame up things that way, it's nice even in bright sunlight. And we also love that it has this like 4-way hinge, just like the Nikon Z9. So they didn't do away with any of those physical important features. Probably the biggest handling change with this camera is it's 30% smaller than the Nikon Z9.
Yeah, I mean, people really like that, especially if you're looking at it to float it on a gimbal, for instance, or you don't want as big of an item which is much leverage on top of a tripod with a grip on it, for instance. This
yeah,
is a
I find it easier to manage, absolutely. And it doesn't have the built-in vertical grip, but there is an optional grip, and that's also gonna double your battery life.
Actually, if you want to put the grip on, this is kind of cool. We were just talking about this, is that it has two ENL15C batteries in it, but they're hot swappable, so you don't have to break up your shot to change batteries.
This is one of the other big differences between the Nikon Z8 and the Nikon Z9 is the battery performance or the battery use. So we have the ENEL15C. You can also use the A's and the B's, but if you want the C's, then you can do the USB charging and powering.
And speaking of USB-Cs, this is very cool, and I love this feature on the Z8. It has two USB-C ports, and you're like, why do we need two ports? One is dedicated power delivery, so if you want to power this for a long shoot, or especially in video work, this allows you to have an external battery source and power your camera and charge your camera all day long.
And then the other one is really handy for accessories. So they have some new accessories that you can work with this. And this is where this camera actually becomes an interesting tool for video. From a video standpoint, this camera is pretty ballin' too.
Oh man, you got 4K whatever.
I thought we were gonna do it, Drew, but we kicked Dave off, and I know you're so excited about this again for being a video production tool. It actually has some advantages over the Z9 in terms of the physical features, but let's get into the good stuff, the internals.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really go over a whole lot of the new video specifications for the Z9. So 12-bit NRAW, 422.
Yeah, there were some firmware updates that enabled a lot of that since we did our Z9 review.
Yeah, no, they've beefed it up quite substantially. The NRAW is hilarious. We've got a 150 gig CF Express card in here, and it's like 5 minutes of NRAW, 8K 60. So like the data rates are just out of this world. The quality is insane though. Like we did a little bit of the NRAW, we did a little bit of the Apple ProRes. We'll show some side-by-sides right around now to show you the difference between like 6K and 8K and just all of that kind of fun stuff. But even like the 4K 60, it's super sampled direct off of 8K off the full sensor readout. So like the quality coming off of the Z8 just overall is insane, especially for the price point.
Yeah, and I think that's what it always has to come back to is for the price point. I mean, although this is priced kind of more in line with like the Canon R5 or the Sony a7 R5, this really does compete with some of the higher end models in terms of the video capability. And of course you have this stabilized sensor, and so it's able to do a lot with it, and it's so fast scanning, so you're not having issues with like rolling shutter, banding.
Yeah, I mean, this competes against stuff like the FX3, honestly, and they're within the same kind of ballpark in terms of price point, but this is an incredibly capable stills camera as well.
And again, from a physical standpoint, you actually have a little bit of an edge because in terms of putting it on a gimbal or rigging it up, creating a cage system, it's gonna be a lot easier for you than if you had it with the Z9.
Yeah, totally. The lack of the battery grip at the very bottom makes it a little bit more streamlined, especially if you're going to be rigging it on like a shoulder mount. And the 2 USB-Cs, I love that. I didn't honestly even think about like the possibility of doing that, one for power, one for, so there's a number of routing options for wirings as well as the accessories that you can mount on this. It's really interesting. It's going to open up a lot of really interesting and unique kind of rigging options for specifically just this camera. I think we're going to see a dual USB-Cs in a lot more cameras coming down the line, honestly.
Yeah, it's something that people have asked for. And the other nice thing is we have that full-size HDMI port. So it just makes a more stable connection with your whole setup. And so I think a lot of people that are hybrid users, whether you're say like a wedding shooter that does both stills and video, I think this is going to be a really solid option. Welcome back, Dave.
Hey, I'm back. I got kicked off again.
Sorry. I know. It's just Drew's so excited about the video stuff. I always like to pull him in and have a little chat. You know, I think overall, the biggest thing with this camera is that it is another awesome hybrid tool. I mean, it checks a lot of boxes on both the still side and video.
We talk about cameras that are jack of all trades or high-end jack of all trades, and this camera really suits that. From very high-end video production to amazing quality stills with great performance. There's really nothing you can't go out and shoot effectively with this camera.
At launch here, it's $1,600 less than the Nikon Z9. So it does kind of feel like it's a bargain in comparison, especially because they didn't take off any of the key features, any of the functionality and processing power.
Well, if you look at the high-end market, right, with the Z9 and like the Canon R3 and the A1 from Sony, right, these are the high-end, I call them hyper cameras, right? These are sort of these highest performing cameras out there, like the Ferrari and Lamborghinis of the camera world. But they're not for everybody. Not everybody wants that full-size camera. They want to carry it smaller, and people are traveling again, thankfully. You know, we don't want that big body. We can pack it a little bit smaller.
Yeah, I mean, so many use cases where I think trimming it down a little bit would be really nice, like wildlife photography, wedding photography, and video. Any of those use cases, I think would be nice just to have that smaller, more practical body. But of course, we want to know, what are your thoughts on this camera? There's been so much buzz about it. Did it check all your boxes? Is it at the price point that you would expect? Let us know in the comments below.
Are you excited about the dual USB-C ports like I am? Make sure you follow us both on Instagram.
And if you're new to our channel, please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we'll catch you again very soon. The Camera Store.
Get the picture.
You know, take a look at all these puppy shots of Kubo and enjoy.
What's going on?
And then puppy montage.
Hey, thanks for sticking around for our first look at the very exciting brand new Nikon Z8. If you want to check out more of our recent content, click up here. And if you're Canadian, you want to shop local, check out thecamerastore.com down here.